I'll be the project manager for the city. But we have an internal planning team and a review team. Those will be staff members from across the different departments within the city. Y'all know I've been here a year and a month now, and one of the things I've done, I think, pretty well is to figure out what all is going on in public works. I've done a little bit of dabbling into figuring out what happens in our neighborhood and housing development, but one of the challenges is really figuring out how to get involved and figure out what the problems are within each department across the city and where we can build in resiliency tools. So a lot of this study, the assessment portion of this, is to better understand how all of the departments work together, where we can solve some problems with some smart people and get the teams working together across silos. Y'all know one of the hardest things about government is we tend to operate within our silo. We do that really, really well. Resilience is about making sure that we de-silo, that we work together. The other group that's important here is the steering committee. And those are the leaders. That can be y'all. Y'all can pick who you want to serve on that steering committee. It'll be the mayor, chief barber, chief DeLap, or director, public works, executive director of the lab, and those sorts of folks. They won't be involved in the everyday of it, but they'll be in the decision-making perspective. We'll have two stakeholder teams, one that's technical and one that's community. The community is going to include, the service organizations as well as environmental nonprofit organizations. But we'll figure out exactly who that is, and then the infrastructure and technical committee, that's going to be your Alabama Powers, your agencies, the Corps of Engineers, those kind of folks who are smart, have this knowledge, and have the tools. In that next slide, the phase 1, you'll see in the deliverables. At the deliverables phase, at each level of that, the steering committee will make the final decision on what happens and how we go forward and what a project and portion looks like. Dealt with the project charter, that's how each committee is going to operate, how we'll be making decisions. We'll all do that. We'll make that final decision together. We'll develop a community outreach and engagement plan, making sure that people are involved in this decision at the local level, that this is a Mobile plan for Mobilians is critically important. So how we involve the community is critical. And then the vision statement for Mobile. This is really why we chose the Water Institute of the Gulf, because they saw the importance of making sure, again, that we determine what are risks, what we're comfortable with in terms of risk, what we feel safe about, and what we want to see as the definite, how long out we want to plan for, 10 years, 20 years, what does our horizon look like? That decision is singularly most important at that level before we go to the next phase. And in the assessment, we're going to be looking at a couple things. We're going to gather data that exists already. There is no modeling, there is no new data that we're going to be creating. By doing that, we're also building partnerships and strengthening partnerships with people like the Corps of Engineers who have a South Atlantic coastal study that they're finishing right now. They also have an Alabama comprehensive plan that they're creating. The National Estuary Program with all their watershed management planning. We're going to take all that data and consolidate it for the city of Mobile to see where we are. But the other two pieces, that this is more than environment. This is about the economy and society, and what are those changes that are coming our way too. So we want to be preparing for that, making sure that our community is ready for what comes next. And then we define the stressors and shocks, and that is different for every city. What can we handle really, really well? Flooding is something that is a giant shock for us, Phoenix, Arizona. But for Mobile, that's a Tuesday. So we know that that's a stressor and not some giant thing unexpected thing. So we'll be looking at those for us and figuring out what we want to be planning for. And again, it's that acceptable risk level. And then the next slide shows you visioning and how we're going to do that. The visioning will happen for us at a local level using stakeholders, but using our team to define that particularly and clearly. And then the next one, the second part of the assessment, and this is where I think I'm probably answering Councilman Reynolds' question a little bit. The asset review will be where we look at what are the single most important things we as the city of Mobile want to shore up. Is it our transportation grid? Is it our housing grid? What does that look like? And again, that's going to be for Mobile and for Mobilians. And then they'll also audit, once we kind of get all that developed and understood, we'll develop our city's rules and policies. And that's going to be a big chunk of something that's really y'all outside of my scope of knowledge and sphere of knowledge. When there may be some easy things that we look at, like how do we do our contracts that we can tweak easily, there may be bigger things that will be decided by y'all as a council. So if we want to recommend a change to ordinances, that'll be a y'all decision all day long. So we'll get this list of recommendations, and then one at a time, the steering committee and the council and the mayor's team will be deciding what we implement and how we move it forward. Okay, and Colleen, I'm sorry, let me introduce Colleen McHugh, who is with the Water Institute. She'll be the project manager. I'd love for you to speak to that.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm Colleen McHugh with the Water Institute of the Gulf. And I think just to add to what Casey said, in terms of this being really a plan for Mobile, I've led work that the Water Institute has done with the city of Houston. Actually worked for the city of New Orleans as we went through a similar planning process. We're now doing work as well with the city of Jacksonville. What I can say is the scope of those plans all looks different, and they need to, right? Because this is based in what matters for Mobile. It's based in the local data that Mobile has, and it's building on the work that Mobile is doing, has been doing. And so the process that we'll go through will make sure that at the end of the day, this plan speaks to the priorities, not that we determine as a consultant team coming in, but that the community and that city leadership determine matter for Mobile.
And I will, when it comes to the resilience plan, and I promise, almost done. The best thing about this consultant team is they're gonna create a strategies list for how we deal with what happened, what we found as our stressors, our shocks, our needs. They'll develop a list of those project priorities that we'll review, that the community at large will review, that the community at large will actually be able to submit ideas for as well. What they will come out with is a roadmap, a list of how we need to go, where we need to go. It will have timelines, it will have leaders. The very most important thing too is it will have shovel-ready projects with opportunities and ideas for funding. So I wanna finish on funding. One of the things that we are the only city in the state of Alabama with a chief resilience officer. What that does, and we're one of the only cities on the northern Gulf Coast, I guess, from New Orleans to Jacksonville, maybe Colleen can tell me. But we're one of the only ones that will have a resilience plan. What that does is that puts us ahead of the pack when it comes to funding at the federal level. The monies that are available through the Infrastructure and Investment in Jobs Act, through the CDBG monies, which I understand, we talked about this yesterday morning, there's $331 million through the CDBG money that will come to Mobile and Baldwin counties. 15% of that can be spent right here. And Chief Barber and Jamie and the mayor have been talking to the HUD folks about why we should get a specific allocation ourselves, because we will have shovel-ready projects. There's, we can't guarantee we get a grant ever, but having these tools is the best way to make that part go forward. I saw with BP oil disaster, New Orleans get the vast majority of funding because they had a very specific, very well-defined plan of action. It's been harder for Mobile, it's been harder for Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Texas to get the same levels of funding because we don't have those plans in place. Working on it now, but this is another major tool in that tool chest for us. Plus, this will also be building into our existing tools. The map for Mobile, the capital improvement plan, all of those will feed resilience into and thread it through those existing plans, not to create a third plan, but to see how to make those plans fit and integrate better. Okay, with that, I'm gonna stop talking and see where y'all have questions, if I answered any of them or what else y'all need.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Casey. I wanted this to come to committee so that we could get a better understanding of what this $460 some odd million is. $460,000 is going to. And I want to know, because this is all new to me, what is resilience? What is resilience? I don't even know what that is.
Well, so resilience is that in a lot of ways it's our ability to handle the stressors and shocks that come our way. It's measured by how quickly you bounce back from a problem or a challenge, but it's how do you face it? And how do you, when a storm comes, what do you do? Are you ready for it? How ready for it are you? How quickly can you go back to life as normal when you face that kind of a storm?
So my question would be, we've been doing that for decades though, right? Currently, when a storm, we've got
Crews that go out and monitor debris, we have the 2 best in the country, we've got staging points for power trucks, we've got the ability, and after the last 2 storms we did a heck of a job. So my questions really go to, why is this necessary to do what we're already doing?
So Councilman Reynolds, I would say that a storm, a hurricane in Mobile is a stressor and not a shock. I would say what we're facing with COVID entering our world, with the BP oil disaster, those are the kind of shocks we were not prepared for and didn't know how to face and didn't know how to handle. So this helps us understand what is our everyday challenge and what are our bigger challenges. And it is also more than, storm is just an easy analogy when it comes to resilience. It's a terminology that most folks can really clearly understand. But there is more to it than that. It's about how a community faces, in some communities, a flat tire can be a shock to their system. It means they can't get to work, it means they can't get their children picked up from school. So we're working to really make sure about how do we thread this throughout the community.
Let me also add, I'm sure you have your own definition of what you think resilient is. But one of the things that we've talked about here in the council recently is how to address the homelessness problem and how we can, urban camping and how we address getting those folks to work. Those have been recent discussions and debates. Those are also parts of chronic stressors that our city, like every other major city in America, faces. And how we address that is something that needs to be woven into the complete plan that the city's looking at to move forward in our map for Mobile and our action plan. And building resilience as a city for our individuals, for our businesses, for our government and the functions that it does, and for the economy here is really, really important. Although Casey said because we kind of expect hurricanes, it may be a stressor, but really that's obviously a shock event, right? So that comes in. But the chronic stressors like homelessness, like blight, like other things that are challenges, those are the ones that we don't necessarily have comprehensive plans to address. And we look at those, as she pointed out earlier, by departments, and maybe Jamie's focused on housing, but someone else is maybe focused on homelessness, and someone else is focused on this. But when you weave all those together in a comprehensive plan, then you can start to actually take steps to address those where one piece may impact the other. And let me also state that, in the military, one of the things that they looked at was having individuals, soldiers, airmen, sailors, be resilient to the things that they're being asked to do. And the citizens of Mobile also we need to help build that resilience in those individuals. Like in Houston, when they had the major floods that really spawned their resiliency plan, and they had entire communities underwater, it's the individuals that weren't ready for that and how they bounce back from that from a mental standpoint as well is really important. And so that'll also look at how, when we have these chronic stressors as well as acute shocks, how we can help and look at our citizens, also make sure they're mentally prepared for addressing those things as well. So it's a very comprehensive, it's not one thing, it may be that, the ecosystem elements down and keeping our river systems clean and clear and ready to recreate so that they don't become overloaded with invasive species. All those pieces are elements that you look at when you look at resiliency.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple more.
Well, just let me give you one thing to think about.
Sure.
When it comes to resilience in the city of Mobile. Most people aren't aware of one of the biggest problems that we may have if we have a Category 3 or stronger storm that comes up to the bay. When the water level pushes up to the bay, it gets above, I think, is it 12 or is it 6? I can't remember.
Yeah.
But if it gets above that point, then with the outfall for our sewer and water, we could face a major calamity that may prevent Mobile from having water up to 2 to 3 months. That's one of the things that resiliency does. So we need to create a shovel-ready project that would clear us of that calamity. Or if we don't have the money to do it, then we need to have a program that says, this is one of the things that needs to happen once we have resources to cure this. Right now, that problem isn't cured. And I can name you probably about 5 others that are like that, that should be in a program that we would have shovel-ready money for. You heard me say when this ARPA run with Gayfors that we have no shovel-ready projects. The resiliency program would also identify shovel-ready projects that we could have used this ARPA funding for too. So all that is kind of what this does. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's kind of my point with bringing up these questions is that we know of a lot of problems that are out there, you know, that if that storm came up the bay, it would cause, you know, disaster in what areas and all that. So I agree that those things are, we need to have some sort of resiliency idea of how to address that. But what we're paying $470,000 for somebody to tell us that that's there when we already know is my concern, is that, you know, are they going to, based on my reading of the contract and understanding, this is sort of a macro view of the whole city. It's not very narrowly focused on, say, those things and those 5 other things that you know. It doesn't design out plans for that. It just identifies them as being a potential risk and that we may need to explore that. Well, I'm just saying we kind of already know that, you know, so I would say that the money spent on it, in my mind, would be, let's put a plan together for that, you know, instead of somebody telling us that we need a plan for that when we already know.
I would ask that, I think his question is gonna follow yours, because he seems like you wanted to ask, I've seen your fingers moving. So let's see what he has to say, but Casey, if y'all would ask, he asked this question, kind of explain a little bit more depth on how the plan will actually develop what he's actually asking us for.
Yeah, and just to be more, you're spot on, and to follow up with Ben's question, when you get that final product, I mean, what you're talking about is a very extensive plan. When you start talking from macro problem down to individual resiliency, that's going to be in chapter 18, paragraph 3 of this plan, that's specific. And if so, that's fine, but I don't see it, I've never seen a plan get down to that level. And I guess that's to Ben's point, is what is that, when you get to that final product, what is that product that's going to be on the shelf for us to use for these, and how do we implement that?
So, and I'm going to let Colleen also speak here in a second to some specifics on what that's going to show, but let me just go back to what Councilman Reynolds stated. When you say we know all the problems, I would ask that if you think you know where all the problems are, then show me the list of where all those are at.
Please.
Because I would tell you, I've been here 3 years, and we don't know where all the problems are. And if we do, they're very minor, they're very stovepipe, where one person may have some notion of where they think the problem is, but there's no comprehensive assessment to say specifically what all those different areas and problems are in a single document, by which then we can say, these are the ones we need to address. And this is the priority in which we need to address them, so that we can come back and say, now we need to go do a further deep dive into this specific area, because it's been identified by experts as your most vulnerable area. And if you want to increase your resilience to have the least impact on your economy, on your individuals, on your infrastructure, this is your roadmap, this is your plan to do that. That does not exist today. Nick Amberger may have some notion of where he thinks some choke points or problems are, but it has not been comprehensively documented. You can talk to Jamie, he thinks, he'll tell you where he thinks some of the housing challenges are in what neighborhoods. It has not been comprehensively documented. And it has not been collectively put together by which then we can say, okay, based on these things, if we address this area, that'll have the best impact for our city and for our economy. New Orleans, had they had probably a more comprehensive plan and had done some prior efforts, they may have been able to prevent the major flooding that happened with Katrina. There were some thoughts and there were some ideas and there were some designs, but as a result, they had to put in $12 or $16 billion to build the seawall, the hurricane protection system, to protect the city of New Orleans. We don't want to wait. They're doing that in Charleston right now. They're getting ready to do the same thing in Charleston, spend billions of dollars to build a seawall because they've waited so long to the point that now their downtown floods on a routine basis. So we don't want to wait to the point that Mobile has its economy underwater or its citizens and businesses severely impacted because we didn't have the foresight to say, let's look and see how we as a city can become more resilient to make sure that our major airplane manufacturer, shipbuilder, our port, our streets, our city hall don't go underwater or have other issues, don't get overrun by other issues. So again, I think it's weaving all those together, but I would just want to back up and say that there is not a comprehensive list of those choke points or issues that you described earlier. So let me let Colleen address real quick the specifics of that.
Yeah, no, I think just to add on to that, really I think the reason to do this comprehensively, to look at these issues broadly, is exactly to get to that point of setting priorities. We know that there are a lot of probably projects on the shelf. Some may be really great projects, some may not be great projects. There also are probably new ideas that this process will bring up. And there are certainly things that the city is already doing well. So it sounds like disaster response is something that the city has great plans around, and that's excellent. It's something that this process can build upon. But one of the reasons to really do this comprehensive look and comprehensive planning process is so that you can prioritize where to focus, resources. Because we know there's not endless resources to get the kinds of projects that you mentioned done. There's a reason why some of those ideas may be still sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Two quick questions. How did we get to the 470,000, and was that budgeted?
$449,671.
Okay.
And y'all moved that money into a capital improvement, a capital plan over a month ago.
So that's in surplus.
No.
No.
Where did we move it from?
No, that was internal within Public Works, so we.
Salary savings,
Yeah, it was.
salary savings.
So we took that out of high-end money that we had basically saved, and you all approved to move for this project about a month ago.
Well, inside, we're looking in depth to make better what we already know. What we know is based on experience and historic data. What the plan does, it helps us collaborate what we know in historic data with what we don't know. Takes us to where we have.
I got one other.
Mr. Jones was asking.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chairman. I think it's obvious that some of us are having some trouble kind of wrapping our head around what we're supposed to end up with. To me, it would be helpful if we could see someone else's resiliency, to see what the finished product looks like. So if you could give us a link or send us a PDF or something like that, I think that might be helpful.
Houston's resilience plan is the easy one to do. I love it because it's really beautifully built and put together. There are also almost a third year into it, so each year it shows you here's what you do year one, and then they say here's what we did year one. So it's really trackable. The challenge is, and the reminder for y'all is, we are not Houston. We're not trying to be Houston. Yes, I will.
See what one looks like. If you could just give us a link or something, I guess they have it
I will have
posted
that.
on the website.
Absolutely, you'll have that.
Any others before I go back to, Gordon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that prior planning prevents poor performance, and I know we need a plan. With that being said, you kind of mentioned about grants, Casey. Would this plan be able to utilize for us to get more grants in this area?
Yes, sir.
Has Houston utilized it to receive grants?
Yes, sir.
And can you share that, when you get that information, how much grants that they, by having a plan like this, how much have they already received?
Yes, I can get that information. I know because I worked for the city of New Orleans, some of those numbers off the top of my head, and the city's resilience strategy leveraged over $200 million, $200 to $300 million in federal grants from FEMA and HUD.
When you do that, can you speak to the TLO and also the Harvey flooding at Buffalo Bayou? That would be prime, that will kind of relate to what we've done here.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing I would add is I think this is actually the perfect time for cities to be undertaking this process because the federal grant opportunities are once in a generation right now in terms of what's coming out of particularly the federal infrastructure bills. And so, my belief is that there's, cities that don't have a plan like this or aren't undertaking a process like this are really leaving significant potential dollars on the table.
Yeah, and that's my point is, that's the $450,000 to receive millions. Makes sense to me, and CJ had an opportunity to go to the National City Conference, and we had to meet with the Shelby, Tocqueville, our senators, our congressmen, and they were speaking about, a lot of times there's so many grant opportunities, but sometimes people are not prepared, they're not ready. And we don't want to miss on these opportunities, so thank you. I look forward to receiving that information.
Ms. Rhodes?
One last thing before we get into pre-council, unless somebody else has something, is in the contract about regarding priority, who decides the priority of what project, or this project, or that? There's nothing in here that says anything about steering committee or things like that one in the slides, in the actual contract.
It's in the proposal, how they do that, how we're doing the committee breakdown and how we're doing the community outreach is in the proposal, as well as the community outreach plan is in one of the very first deliverables. So that was defined in the
Yeah,
RFP and it's defined.
Yeah, the outreach plan, yeah, that, which y'all will decide between the project manager and the city, and that'll be go out in the public, get the input from everyone, y'all will decide on that according to the contract.
There are two committees that will be created immediately. One is an internal working group of staff, and one is a steering committee that is leadership. So that's the first two things that happen. Those happen prior to any other movement that will happen within the first month of the program being put together. That's a role that the city council can play along with the mayor's staff.
And the reason I say that that's important, the prioritization of these various projects, because we are not Houston, and we're not Charleston, and we're not Pittsburgh, and we're not Boston, and these other areas that the Water Institute's done these studies for. Prioritizing things like, and this is something I found in my CIP discussions, that I had spent $400,000 or $500,000, or recommended $400,000 or $500,000 to be spent on the ADA compliant sidewalks, right? When there were bigger priorities that at least I had in mind that needed money to be spent on it before we did the ADA compliant for existing sidewalks. So as these things come about, and just looking at the Houston plan, it's got priorities that are laid out here. There's some that say public art, park access, which a lot of those things we're doing, but cool pavement, recreation, water storage, things like that. I don't want those things to sort of get in the way of the big projects that we already know, that we already have to fund in some way, somehow, including the $11 million that we just passed on additional plans. And these were just plans that we're coming up with. So as that steering committee and all that progresses, in the event that this passes, I think with those other projects in mind, should be prioritized in the most appropriate way so that we get the things done that we know we need to get done, and not just tack on additional money for resiliency's sake. Make $1 that would ordinarily go $1 worth of goods, now go to 70 cents because we're doing some resilience.
Well, just to help there, if I remember right, Colin, there was a scoring process used out there, wasn't it, where they scored the most important, need, and they ranked those projects by scoring, correct?
Yes, so part of our planning process, and we actually, at the Water Institute, use something called structured decision-making. And what that does is sort of systematically help us walk through step-by-step, understanding what are the objectives, looking at different alternatives, so putting all of these ideas on the table, and then actually evaluating those different, project opportunities, program opportunities, policy opportunities, and then prioritizing them based off of those objectives that you set. So we'll have a process by which we're gonna help the city really determine what are the right priority projects, policies, programs, to move forward with to make the city more resilient. And I think the other point I would add, and there's some great, and I'm happy to send this as well, there's some great literature on really the benefits of investing in resilience and mitigation up front. And that often what you find is, yes, you may spend an extra 20% more on a project, or you may, invest up front in a mitigation project, but you save significantly down the line. And that, benefit cost ratio is, I've seen numbers that are 4-to-1, 6-to-1. It's significant. And it's, I think that's also part of what the goal is here, is to really make sure that the city is investing well in the future and isn't finding themselves sort of spending money to, come back after an event.
Thank y'all.
Everyone good?
Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
So,